due to the interwar developments and uh, post-war developments made world into different names. So, for example, the Cold War. Cold War represented a global system on of bipolarity. As we said, after end of the World War II, the world has divided into two systems, namely one is capitalist with a capitalist ideology of USA, and another one is socialist ideology of USSR. So that is bipolarity. So bipolar system is one where two powers dominate the system. So in that case, it was, as we said, United States of America is one side, and Soviet Union is another side. So which with each side assembling their allies, means their supporting nations into their sphere of influence, and also uh, when the this Cold War ended, a debate raised over how to describe the system, because after the ending of Cold War, USSR disintegrated into uh, small states, and United States become as unipolar, means single superpower in the international political system, as there was only one superpower remaining after the end of Cold War. So that is United States of America. This idea was captured by unprecedented historical situation where one state was significantly more economically, militarily, and politically and powerful to that extent that it would take a generation or more for a competitor of equal stature to emerge. So many thinkers in the international relations argued that the world has entered a period of multipolarity. Multipolarity is the historical norm as it describes a system with multiple competing powers. So the last defined multipolar system ended shortly after the Second World War, which had left the European powers depleted, giving way to the Cold War bipolar system. So multipolar today, multipolarity now we can see today represented not just by rivaling states as it was in the past, but by the emergence of ideas of global governance through international organizations such as United Nations organization, which complete with and often constrain the power of states. So some of thinkers in the international relations suggest that bipolarity may return with the growing rivalry between United States and a rising China shaping the 21st century. So others have suggested that the system of tripolarity may emerge, adding a resurgent Russia again, and also today's system can also as one of multiplexity, a new type of order in which several systems exist independently at the same time, but not necessary to conflict, much like the idea of different movie screening under one roof in a multiplex cinema. So a multiplex world order is not anchored by a hegemon, because there are several nations are there, not only single power, not only two powers. So instead it is culturally, politically diverse yet economically interconnected. So when challenges to the peace, security, and welfare are increasingly transnational, so it involves a uh, dispersal of power and influence among both established and emerging powers. So this is the uh, present situation in the international system. So in international politics and systems, the unipolar world order is a distribution of power in which only one states dominate the economic, social, cultural, and influence over the globe, called as unipolar world. So the distribution of power and influence over a state, region, or globally is called polarity. So it is described as the nature of international system at any given period. So polarity can be distinguished into different types. As we said, one is unipolarity, second one is bipolarity, and last one is multipolarity. So in the international political system, the unipolar world is a power distribution in which only one states dominate most of the economic, social, cultural, and military influence over the globe. So the unipolar world should be confused with monarchy or empire. So unipolarity happens in an anarchical international system. So there is only one superpower and no one challenges that superpower. So we have to know what is unipolar world. So a unipolar world is when a majority of the world's dominated by a single state or single nation's military and economic power and social and cultural influence, that is called as unipolar world. So after the end of the Cold War between USA and USSR, the Soviet Union collapsed and the USA emerged as a single superpower nation globally. So many scholars of international relations believes that this was the beginning of America's emerging unipolar world order. So America holds superiority and dominance in commercial and military power. So the US dollar is considered to be the world's dominant reserve currency. So politics is all about power and influence only. So the nation with the most power and economic, social, cultural, and military influence becomes a hegemony. So countries and nations keep engaging with each other to gain and retain power. So the rise of the USA as the single superpower of the world after the end of Cold War can be considered the unipolar world order movement. So the United States accepted a certain global dominance through economy and military support and also with political influence. This is the introduction and meaning of unipolar world system. So another one is bipolar world. A bipolar world can be defined as an international political system in which the majority of the global economy, culture, politics, and military is influenced by two superpower states. So that is called as bipolar world. So if we see the classic examples of bipolar world is the period between 1947 to 1991. During the Cold War period, the Soviet Union and the United States of America emerged as superpowers. So trying to dominate each other for decades. So the Sino-Soviet split led to the emergence of China as a possible third superpower at nowadays. So in the bipolarity system, it is possible that power and influence of international relations can be extended to a much larger domain. So, such as alliances and organizations coming together to exert dominance and powers on the globe. So, for example, in case of both world wars, the power was divided into two spheres, the Axis powers and the allies of the world in World War II, as we discussed in previous classes. So, which was fought from 1939 to 1945, formed a military alliance, and the Axis powers was defeated. And the First World War, also known as the Great War, which was fought from 1914 to 1918, the power was divided between Central Powers and Allied Powers. So this is all about bipolar world. So another one is multipolar world. So multipolarity can be defined as the distribution of power in which more than two nations have almost equal amounts of power and influence on the global economy, society, culture, and military system. So the non-polarity world is the power domain where there are numerous superpowers, but there is no central power dominating any other superpower called non-polarity. So this power can be formed in many places and many regions also. This international system dilutes the meaning of the term polarity. So it is an example of non-polar world that is not widely found and discussed. So this is all about multipolar world. So if we see the advantages and disadvantages of unipolar world and bipolar world, the advantages of unipolar world are unipolarity favors the absence of war among great powers, because there is only one superpower. So that will be causes for peace and security also, because there is no opponent is there for the one superpower. And unipolarity favors comparatively low levels of competition for prestige or security, are the main reasons for war among big powers. So this is the advantages. And also there are several disadvantages also there. Power imbalances in the world creates imperialists and warmongers. So the United States has been at war for 13 of the 22 years since the end of the Cold War. So all these wars are waged against weaker countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So in this situation, weaker countries are the worst sufferers during this system. So oil wars and USA's meddling in the affairs of resource-rich countries, like it causes Libyan crisis, oil wars in the Middle East, and war in Iraq, etc. So these are the disadvantages with the unipolar world. So there are several advantages are there with multipolar world. So distribution of power in which more than two nation states have nearly equal amounts of military, cultural, and economic influence, called as multipolar world, right? So constantly the changing power balance discourages fixed alliances. Everyone wants to be friend with everyone. So due to complexity of mutually assured destruction scenarios with nuclear weapons, multipolar systems may be more stable than bipolar systems. So, in this multipolar system, international decisions will often be made for strategic reasons to maintain a balance of power rather than out of ideological or historical reasons. So, there are several disadvantages also there with this multipolar system. So if we see, struggle for power will be there. So everyone wants to gain power, everyone wants to become superpower in the international system and to influence strategic advantage and resources, uh, and situations may be raised like Ukraine crisis and annexation of Crimea by Russia and Syrian crisis and South China issue and China's string of pearls, etc. situations may be uh, raised by these multipolar systems. So, the entire international systems of these unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity. So, if we see the advantages and disadvantages of bipolar system, there are several advantages are there with bipolarity. In bipolarity, weaker states tend to participate in institutional arrangements and dominated by one or one other major players. So the non-alignment movement during the Cold War played a distinctive role, and it was successful in institutionalizing a path independent of either superpower. So, and bipolarity also is less war prone than multipolarity because each superpower knows that only the other can threaten it. So, realizes that it cannot pass the blame to third parties. So, and recognizes it can balance additions to others' capabilities also. So, bipolarity blocks or at least complicates three common paths of war. One is uncertainty, free riding, and fear of allied defection of superpowers as they expanded their own spheres of influence in different parts of the world. So this is are the advantages with bipolar world, and there are several disadvantages of bipolarity is there. One is the world is sharply divided into two allies, namely Western and Eastern Alliance. So headed by US and Soviet Union. So many military alliances also established with this conflict between two groups, like NATO with 15 membership, defense treaty with Japan, ANZUS means America, Australia, New Zealand. It's a trilateral agreement, and CETO, defense treaty with China also, examples of this bipolarity system. And in this bipolar system, the smaller states are forced to join in any one alliance. They got the promise of protection of weapons and economic aid against their local rivals. So they are remained tied with its protective superpowers to limit influence of other superpower and its allies. So the concept of bipolarity has significant implications for global order. Firstly, two rival powers cannot remain in equilibrium indefinitely. So under this bipolarity system, the proportion of alliance dynamics that was an outgrowth of systematic balancing increased. So this is the disadvantages with the bipolarity system. So if we see the international system in the light of power distribution among states, the discipline of international introduced these three international systems, namely unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity. So, the presence of a single superpower demonstrates a unipolar system, as we said. In case two powers are there, it indicates a bipolar system. And in case of existing many great powers, represents a multipolar system. This is unipolarity and bipolarity and multipolarity system. So there are several advantages are there. There are several disadvantages are there. If we analyze in unipolar system, it is a greatest source of danger. Arrogance means spread culture, maintain positions of hegemony. So one country can force to all the nations to acquire its culture and other things. In bipolar system, it is secure, but it's not power. So in multipolarity system, the greatest source of danger is miscalculation, and the motivation is accumulation of power. So everyone wants to try to get superpower position in the international system. So this is all about these three international systems. So our next topic is about Cold War. In this Cold War only, the superpowers existence will be there. So after the end of the World War II, the world divided into two superpowers. So the term superpower was first coined by William T. Fox. So superpower means great power whose armed force is so mobile that it can be deployed in any strategic theater, or as opposed to a great power whose interests and influence are confined to a single religion theater. So a major power is different from a superpower. So a country could be described as the major power when it has all the elements of power along with nuclear power and has the capacity to maintain balance of power within a given region. So if you see the emergence of superpowers, the end of the Second World War was significantly altered the power positions of various states on the global scenario. So and the significant developments was the emergence of United States of America and USSR as superpowers. So international relations are essentially Eurocentric till the end of the two world wars. And the first time the non-European state, the US became a decisive factor in international relations, and the weakening of European states created a power vacuum that speedily filled by the US and USSR. So, later, post Second World War, there was just one country which possessed the potential that no other state had. In July 1945, the Americas exploded experimentally the first nuclear device in the history of mankind. They dropped two atom bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki that broke the opposition of Japan and led for absolute surrender. So that is the end of Second World War also. The world was shocked as both US allies and Soviet Union were kept in the dark of the nuclear bomb. So Japan surrendered and unconditionally, and the consequent American victory deprived the USSR's of all but a token share in the post-war settlement in the Far East. So the Soviet Union was an inferior and weak power for next 5 years. Still, USSR developed her own nuclear device in 1949. So besides its nuclear weapons, America became a superpower was the fact that no battle ever took place on its territory throughout the period of war. So After the Pearl Harbor attack, Americans were engaged in unmatched war, but the civilian lives and property were left untouched. This gave an added advantage for Americas to emerge as superpower because their other allies in the war, Britain was heavily bombarded, France was under occupation for 4 years. So later, the emergence of Soviet Union has a superpower. So the power base of the Soviet Union was not comparable to that the United States, but has become a leading industrial and military power in the span of few decades. The USSR had succeeded in establishing communist regimes in Poland and several other East European countries. So in spite of differences in economic situations of the US and USSR, the Soviet Union had become number 2 world power at the end of Second World War. So the Soviet Union became a nuclear power in 1949, but until 1953, the US maintained clear superiority in areas like delivery system. So this is the emergence of Soviet Union as second superpower. So the Cold War was a period of 1945 to 1991 of geopolitical tension between Soviet Union and its satellite states, means Eastern European countries and the United States with its allies, the Western European countries after World War II. So post World War II, the world got divided into two power blocks dominated by two superpowers, that is Soviet Union and USA. So the two superpowers are primarily engaged in an ideological war between the capitalist USA and communist Soviet Union. So the term cold is used because there was no large scale fighting directly between the two sides. So simply we say in our simple words, Cold War means indirect war between these two superpowers. So there is no direct war between these two powers or two allies also. So it is a ideological war between America and Soviet Union. So that is called as Cold War. So Cold War means indirect war, simply says indirectly war. So Cold War was between allied countries, means UK, France, etc., who were led by the US and the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, officially known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, so simply known as USSR. So it is the world's first communist state, was established in 1922. So if we see the reasons for the Cold War, during the World War, allied countries, US, UK, and France, and Soviet Union fought together against the Axis powers. Axis powers, which are Nazi Germany, Japan, and Austria. However, this wartime alliance could not work out after the World War II. So due to multiple factors. So there are several facts are there. One is Potsdam Conference was held in Berlin in 1945 among US, UK, and Soviet Union to discuss immediate administration of defeated Germany, demarcation of boundary of Poland, occupation of Austria, role of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. So Soviet Union wanted some portion of Poland bordering Soviet Union to be maintained as buffer zone. However, the USA and UK did not agree to this demand. Also, the USA did not inform the Soviet Union about the exact nature of the atomic bomb dropped on Japan. So this created suspicion in the Soviet Union about the intentions of Western countries embittering on the alliance. So this created suspicion in the Soviet leadership. And one more thing is there, that is about Truman Doctrine. Truman Doctrine was announced in March 12, 1947 by US President Harry S. Truman. So the Truman Doctrine was the United States policy to stop the Soviet Union's communist and imperialist endeavors. So through various ways like providing economic aid to the other countries to control or to stop the Soviet Union's activities. So, for example, United States appropriated financial aid to support the economies and militaries of Greece and Turkey. So, this is one example. And historians believe that the announcement of this Truman Doctrine marked the official declaration of the Cold War. So, one more thing is reason is there. Iran, some important events also there during the Cold War, because during the 1950s, majorly the nuclear arms race was one of the cause for this Cold War. So the Americans believed that the Soviets had caught up technologically, which led to a nuclear arms race. So the two superpowers tried amassed nuclear weapons, both sides fearing they might fall behind in research and production of nuclear weapons. Over 55,000 nuclear warheads were produced during the Cold War, with the US spending an estimated $5.8 trillion on nuclear weapons, labs, reactors, bombers, submarines, missiles, and silos. So, nuclear warfare eventually become a deterrent rather than the weapon. So, this is also one of the cause for the Cold War. If you see, the major early causes are the wartime alliances with US and USSR is one of the circumstances and not ideology. Later on, ideological differences are made two blocks into two superpowers into this Cold War zone. So the emergence of communism, which is started with the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917, replaced Russia's with the dictatorship of the proletariat and established a communist state. So the Bolsheviks then decided to withdraw Russia from World War I, as civil war engulfed of the country, leaving Britain and France to fight the Axis powers alone. So the White Army supporters who fought the Bolsheviks during Russian Civil War were then supported by the Western powers. So capitalism and communism, this is the ideological opposites and during entire the Cold War. So the political and the economic systems of the capitalist USA and communist USSR were ideologically incompatible. So both sides wanted to affirm their model and force countries around the world to conform to their ideologies. So many disagreements over Germany is one of the cause for this Cold War, and formation of alliances also there for the causes for this emergence of Cold War. If you see the important incidents in during the Cold War, that is, one is wars around the world is one of the major events during the Cold War period. So there was never any direct large scale fighting between US and USSR. As we said, Cold War means indirect war. There is no direct fights will be there. So the two superpowers waged war only by supporting different regional conflicts known as proxy wars. Proxy wars means they directly not participating in that war, but they support that nations in the name of aid, weapons, etc. So Korean War is one of the important event during the Cold War. In 1950, Korea was divided into two zones. One is communist north and the capitalist democratic south. So in a bid to contain the spread of communism to South Korea, the United States sent troops to the country, military troops. So the Chinese responded by sending their own troops to the border. So this was, however, ended in a stalemate, and while till present both North and South Korea are still at war zone only. So Vietnam War also one of the important event and incident in the Cold War period. So the Vietnam War was an extremely long and costly conflict that pitted North Vietnam against South Vietnam. And Afghanistan War also done in the 1980s, just as the United States had done in Vietnam. So the Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan. In response, the US supported Mujahideen Afghani guerrillas against the USSR by sending them money and weapons. So the USSR was unsuccessful in its efforts to turn the country into a communist state during Afghan war. So as the tension between Soviet Union and allied countries grew, Soviet Union applied Berlin blockade in 1948 is one of the important event. So the Berlin blockade was an attempt by the Soviet Union to limit the ability of allied countries to travel to their sectors of Berlin. So and also the Marshall Plan versus the Comintern. In 1947, American Secretary of State George Marshall unveiled European Recovery Program, which offered economic and financial help wherever it was needed. So one of the aims of this European Recovery Program was to promote the economic recovery of Europe. So this was an economic intention and economic extension of Truman Doctrine. So the Comintern means the Soviet Union denounced whole idea of Marshall Plan as dollar imperialism. So therefore, a Comintern means Communist Information Bureau was launched in 1947 as the Soviet response to the Marshall Plan. So it was an organization to draw together mainly Eastern European countries. So there is a space race also there, because space exploration served as another dramatic arena for Cold War competition. So in 1957, Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite and the first man-made object to be placed into the Earth's orbit. So in 1958, the United States launched its own satellite called Explorer 1. So, however, the space race was won by the US when it successfully landed the first man, Neil Armstrong, on the surface of the moon in 1969. So, this is one of the important events during the Cold War period. And arms race also one of the important factor during the entire Cold War period, because the containment strategy of United States provided the rationale for an unprecedented arms buildup in the United States, reciprocated by Soviet Union. So development of nuclear weapons took place on a massive scale, and the world entered into the age of nuclear age. So the arms race also one of the important factor and incident in this Cold War period. So the Cuban Missiles Crisis also one of the important event. If you see, the Cuba got involved in the Cold War when United States broke off its diplomatic relations with Cuba in 1961. The Soviet Union increased their economic aid to Cuba. So in 1961, the USA planned Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, intending to overthrow the head of Cuban state, Fidel Castro, who was backed by the Soviet Union. However, the operation failed. So Fidel Castro then appealed to the Soviet Union for military help, to which Soviet Union decided to set up a nuclear missile launchers in Cuba aimed at the USA. So the Cuban Missile Crisis brought two superpowers on the brink of a nuclear war. However, this crisis was averted diplomatically. The collapse of Soviet Union is the end of Cold War. So the end of Cold War was finally marked by the dissolution of the Soviet Union into 15 newly independent nations in 1991. The USSR became the Russian Federation and no longer had a communist leader. So this is the end of the Cold War. So if you see the reasons for the collapse of Soviet Union, one is military reasons. The space race and the arms race drained a considerable proportion of Soviet Union's resources, and also policies of Mikhail Gorbachev in order to kickstart moribund Soviet economy. Gorbachev instituted the policies of glasnost, means openness, and perestroika, means restructuring, openness and restructuring. Glasnost was intended for liberalization of the political landscape, and perestroika intended to introduce quasi-free market policies in place of government-run industries. So it allowed more independent actions from various ministries and introduced many market-like reforms in the market system. Rather than sparking a renaissance in communist thought, these steps opened the floodgates to criticism of the entire Soviet apparatus. So Afghanistan war also one of the reason. The Soviet Afghan during 1979 to 89 was another key factor in the breakup of Soviet Union, as it drained the economic and military resources of Soviet Union. So the end of the Cold War marked the victory of the US, and the bipolar world order turned into a unipolar system. So, however, over the last decade of Cold War period, the position of the United States as the world's most powerful state has appeared increasingly unstable. The United States invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, non-traditional security threats, global economic instability, the apparent spread of religious fundamentalism, together with the rise of emerging economic powers like Japan, Australia, India, China, etc., have made the world look more multipolar and has led many to predict the decline of the West and the rise of the rest. So, if we see the India's role during this Cold War period as a leader of non-alignment movement, India's response to the ongoing Cold War was twofold. At one level, it took particular care in staying away from the two alliances. Second, it raised its voice against the newly decolonized countries becoming part of these alliances. So India gave a strategic idea to the world that is about non-alignment movement. So non-alignment movement means after getting independence from the colonial rulers after the end of World War, India introduced this system to not to join in any bloc, US or USSR. So being neutral is the policy of non-alignment movement. So neutrality is the primary principle of non-alignment movement. So India's policy was neither negative nor passive. So as Nehru reminded the world, non-alignment was not a policy of freeing away. On the contrary, India was in favor actively intervening the world affairs to soften Cold War rivalries. So India tried to reduce the differences between the alliances and thereby prevent differences from escalating into full-scale war. So Indian diplomats and leaders were often used to communicate and mediate between Cold War rivals, such as in the Korean War in the early 1950s. And also during this time, India chose to involve other members also into non-alignment group. So during the Cold War period, India repeatedly tried to activate those regional and international organizations which were not a part of alliances led by US and USSR. So Nehru reposed great faith in genuine commonwealth of free and cooperating nations that would play a positive role in softening, if not ending the Cold War. So, however, India saw a pro-Soviet tilt during the Indira Gandhi period, Indira years. So during 1960s, India was seeking to boost its military power post the 1962 defeat. So, and while the West was hesitant to upset the Indian-Pakistan balance, given these circumstances, India leaned towards the USSR. So, India could anyhow not realistically attain strategic autonomy with its dependence on foreign powers for military equipment. So gaining Moscow's military and political backing was a pragmatic means securing India's security interests while also not completely discarding non-alignment, as India had not entered into a formal alliance with the USSR. So as such, as India's foreign policy was driven primarily by quest of power, aligning with the Cold War norm. So also Indira Gandhi signing of a peace and friendship and cooperation treaty with the USSR before the 1971 India-Pakistan war is widely seen as a breach of non-alignment, while India was arguably maintaining the subcontinental balance of power also. So this is about ending of Cold War. So if we see the pages of the Cold War, first phase is 1946 to 1949. In this phase, in America and Soviet Union, Russia disbelieved each other. America always tried to control the Red regime. Red regime means this communist regime in Russia. Without any hesitation, Soviet Russia established communism by destroying democracy in the Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and other Eastern European countries. So, in order to reduce Russia's hegemony, America helped Greece and Turkey by following Truman Doctrine, which came into force in 1947. In second phase, that is during the period of 1949 to 1953. So in this phase, the treaty was signed between Australia, New Zealand, America in 57, which was known as UNCLOS. So America also signed a treaty with Japan at the time of taking armaments from Russia, army from China. North Korea declared war against South Korea. In the third phase, that is between 1953 to 1957. So the United States of America formed SEATO in 1954 in order to reduce Soviet Russia's influence. In 1955, America formed MEDO in Middle East within a short span of time. So in the fourth phase, 1957 to 62, in 1959, the Russian President Khrushchev went on a historical tour to America. Both the countries were annoyed for due to accident and the Berlin crisis. So in 1962, Cuba's missile crisis contributed a lot to the Cold War. This incident created an atmosphere of conversation between American President Kennedy and Russian President Khrushchev. So America assured to Russia that it would not attack Cuba, and Russia also withdrew missile station from Cuba. In fifth phase, during the 1962 to 1969, also marked a mutual suspicion between USA and USSR. There was a worldwide concern demanding ban on nuclear weapons. In this period, hotline was established between the White House and Kremlin. This compelled both the parties to refrain from nuclear war. So in spite of that, the Vietnam problem and the problem of Germany kept Cold War between USA and USSR. In fact, in the sixth phase, during 1969 to 78 was marked a detente between USA and USSR. So at the time of American President Nixon and Russian President Brezhnev played a vital role for putting an end to the Cold War. So the SALT Treaty of 1972, the Summit Conference on Securities of 1975 in Helsinki, and the Belgrade Conference in 1978 brought America and Russia closer. So in the last phase, during 1979 to 1987, in this phase, certain changes were noticed in the Cold War period. That is why historians call this phase as New Cold War. In 1979, the American President Jimmy Carter and Russian President Brezhnev signed SALT II treaty. But in 1979, the prospects of mitigating Cold War were marred by sudden development in Afghanistan. In 1983, Russia withdrew from a talk on missile with America. In 84, Russia boycotted the Olympic Games held at Los Angeles. So the result of the Cold War had far-reaching implications in international affairs. At first, it gave rise to fear, psychosis, which resulted in a mad race for the manufacture of more sophisticated armaments. Various allies like NATO, SEATO, Warsaw Pact, CENTO, UNJUS, etc. were formed only to increase world tension. Secondly, Cold War rendered the United Nations organization ineffective because both superpowers tried to oppose the actions proposed by the opponent. And due to Cold War, the Third World was created. A large number of nations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America decided to keeping away from the military alliances of the two superpowers. So they like to remain neutral. So non-alignment movement became the direct and outcome of the Cold War. And the Cold War was designed against mankind. It is the unnecessary expenditure in the armament production created a barrier against progress of the world. And whole world as a family, this principle was shattered on the rock of frustration due to the Cold War. It divided the world into two groups, which was not a healthy sign for mankind. And this Cold War created an atmosphere of disbelief among the nations. They questioned among themselves how unsafe were they under Russia or America. Finally, this Cold War disturbed the world peace also. The alliances and the counter alliances created a disturbing atmosphere. It was the curse for the world, though Russia and America, being superpowers, came forward to solve the international crisis, yet they could not be able to establish a perpetual peace in the world. This is the chapter of Cold War in our syllabus. So, and in tomorrow's class, we will discuss about power, national power, balance of power, and collective security. And also, we'll try to discuss about peace and security, disarmament, and arm control. So, so important questions. I will drop previous year's question papers in tomorrow's class. Just remind me. Okay, thank you for your participation. I am concluding the session. Tomorrow, same time, we will meet again. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all.